puina mo tēnei rā, engari ko te tumanako ka tukutuku ka heke heke nā mihi kia koutou katoa. Ara ko te huna kua tau mai I raro iho nei te kaupapa. I waihuihora ki Covid, me te hauora Māori horo atu I tō tātou nei motu. E aki nā tikana I tuku iho kia mātou e nā tipuna, ka tīmata o tātou hui. I runa ake nei te karakia, anō reira tuahi nā māhuna, kei karakia tātou. Kia tau nā manaaki tana a te mea naro ki runa ki tēnā o mātou. Kia mahea ake te huamākihi kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi tū te reo rangatira kia tūturu ka whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. E tiwi, kei te tuku nā mihi kia koutou katoa, mo tō koutou kaha ki te hāpai, wera o mātou mahi, hora atu rā I te motu, I runa I nā mahi whakapiki ake I te hauora o te tānata, kia tau atu anō te huna katoa ki te taumata o te oranga. Nō reira ahakoa iti, he mihi mahana atu, he mihi aroha atu kia koutou katoa. Nō reira nau mai, haere mai rā ki wa tātou nei wānanga. Kia ora everybody. Apologies for the late start. Today we had a few technical glitches, which unfortunately is all part and parcel of trying to deliver wānanga in this fashion, but please accept our humble apologies for the delay. In a short while, we'll in earnest get on with the discussion today, but firstly I was going to hand it over to
Thank you, Trevor. Just very quick housekeeping. A reminder, please, that you mute and unvideo yourselves. There is a function for us to mute everyone. Then I have to unmute our presenter. But if you are just coming on, if you can remember, please, to unmute and unvideo yourselves. Also, this is a reminder that the session is being recorded for your viewing at a later time. Thank you, Trevor.
Kia ora, Emma. And just briefly again, I was going to hand it over to Sione to issue a welcome of his own to you all. Kia ora, thank you, Sione.
Thank you, Trevor, and kia ora, everyone. I'm Sione Tuikahi. I'm speaking to you from my home in Auckland. Of course, Trevor Simpson, our Deputy Executive Director, is talking for you from up north in Matakohe. And this is the time of Covid-19, and we are still all staying home. Again, along with Trevor, our sincere apologies for the technical glitches in our system and our inability to start on time. But now we are back again. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to 60 plus of you participants from around the country who are participating in this phase of a series of webinars that the Health Promotion Forum would like to deliver to you in the interest of enhancing your knowledge and your ability to deliver your health promotion work to your whānau, your hapu, your iwi, and all the communities that you are serving around the island. Again, a warm welcome to you. And back to you, Trevor. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora tātou. Well, I think we'll get into the body of this discussion now. So today I'm going to briefly talk about, well, the emergence of the COVID-19 emergency itself and how it might be impacting on us and the work that we're doing in our Māori communities or with Māori whānau themselves. And then look at perhaps some of the things that Health Promotion's doing while this is occurring. So how are we engaging with Māori communities and the different ways in which we are using Indigenous models. So I'll just move through what we'll be discussing today. So as we know, COVID-19 in a short time frame has had an immediate impact on us all. But we've seen, despite that, we've seen some pretty positive things occurring. So we've seen Māori communities rally around each other, and that's both urban and rural communities, embracing preventative methods and also embracing the key messages that the government's been disseminating to us all. We've also seen the voluntary services and other NGOs and service providers mobilising to help out the Māori communities themselves. So we've seen food parcels for kaumātua, for whānau, and other things happening out there. So the mobilisation of all that's quite staggering, I think. Communities didn't wait around, they took action straight away. But from a negative perspective, of course, when we're seeing the emergence of such a dire need for food parcels and so forth, that we've found that these services some of them have become basically overrun. So it's an indicator that probably that we already had problems before this occurred in terms of the distribution of health outcomes for Māori communities. And so what it's showing us is that the historical inequities that were already there have resulted in the stark realities that we see today during COVID. And certainly historical records support the notion that Māori communities are vulnerable in pandemics. We've seen this historically. We're going to take a short look at the brief history of viruses in Aotearoa for Māori. But certainly what we'll be seeing over the next months, if not many years, the socio-economic impacts that will be felt by Māori for some time, I think. So if we project ahead a little bit, and look at what we have in the situation now, we can see that 46 to 48% of Māori work in manufacturing, agriculture, and a list of low-wage employment groups. So we know that in each of those groups that when things like pandemics happen, that they get impacted on almost immediately. And I think we will see this moving into the future. So certainly the government's talking about it. We've had stimulus stopgaps, but they're temporary. We need to be thinking, I think, about the long-term implications of COVID and what it's going to do for the Māori economy and the rest of our economy, of course. So we will be looking or hoping for investment or reinvestment in the economy to mitigate long-term implications for Māori. It's going to be acute because what we know is that poverty was already here before COVID, but since COVID's arrived, we're expecting it to worsen a little before it gets better. So with COVID occurring and all of these things in the social environment happening to us and for Māori, it'll be good to start now to measure the health outcomes over the medium to long term, just to get a better understanding of the true impact of what's happened here. Okay, so I'll move on to the brief history and lessons learned. Of course, viruses, communicable diseases, and so forth are not new for us. They've been around basically since the arrival of people from Europe. And in Europe, we saw the emergence of several pandemics actually before they arrived here. So as early as 1781, there was a huge pandemic that stemmed from Russia and China, emanated from there, killing many people. And there were others right through the 1700s. The one that had immediate effect on Māori here in Aotearoa was the one that we refer to as Rewharewha. That was the first recorded incidence of a virus in Aotearoa that had a huge impact on Māori communities. We had never seen Rewharewha before, so when it did come and impact on our communities, the usual health regulatory system of tapu and noa was ineffective, basically. So for a long time, Māori would have been confused about what this thing was and what it was doing, and had no mechanisms, no tools to fight it with. My iwi back home, we called it papareti. Papareti is a toboggan. And so it's a metaphor really for how quickly the disease had impact on people. So it likens it to you get the disease at the top of the hill, you hop in your toboggan, and by the time you get to the bottom, you're dead. And that's exactly how it worked. It was immediate, it was very fast and virulent. And we don't have the records, but we have some oral traditions of what sort of impact that had on our communities. And so one of them was, well, we think now that it was a bird flu, a type of bird flu that had come down from Europe. And some of the indicators of that were the end result for the person. So at the end, when it was about to kill the people, it turned their bodies black. We think that's to do with oxygen deprivation and stuff like that, which is a common indicator of bird flu. So we think that it kind of had that impact. So whole communities wiped out, basically. There were other flus through the 1800s. There was another pandemic again that emanated from Russia and China in about 1833 that killed millions of people around the world. I think between 4 and 5 million people around the world died from that disease. Then we culminated kind of in the Spanish influenza pandemic. And I put Princess Te Whare up there because I think her story, and amongst other stories, is quite significant when we're talking about diseases, communicable diseases particularly. Excuse me. So we know that that she had a lot of input into dealing with communicable diseases. She was particularly successful, really, in the eradication of typhoid. She advocated for and introduced a vaccination program through the Waikato that all but wiped out typhoid. So again, we had these leaders from the time that were forging the way in terms of understanding disease, the medical approach to disease, and so forth, and mobilizing communities to deal with it. She did a stunning job, really. So we know that in 1918, when the flu arrived, had a huge impact on our Māori communities, and it was partly responsible for the 100 orphans that Te Whare adopted. These orphans came from, were left behind in families that were suffering from typhoid, the big ones, TB, and then the flu on top of all that. So, so very much a forward thinker in terms of dealing with things from within Māori communities. And so she advocated for vaccination. So we know that the first effective vaccine for typhoid was created in about 1896. And then it became widely available by 1909. So she pushed for that, managed to get that happening in Waikato. And so kind of led the way in terms of how we might be thinking about health in a different way. Our thinking started actually previous to her work there, and that was in the sort of the late 1800s, early 1900s, the emergence of kind of new Māori leadership. As we know, the highest estimates for the Māori population just prior to the turn of the 19th century was around 40,000 people. So decimated over 100 or so years of interaction with Europeans. Communicable diseases again, and so forth, had the biggest impact of all. So we saw kind of different areas of leadership emerging. So we had tribal leadership, people like, well, chiefs like Te Huhu Tūkino, Tawhio, and many, many others, again, coming to the fore to advocate for Māori health. We had a list of prophetic leaders, so we had Te Koti, Rua Kinana, Te Whiti and Tohu, and again others that were emerging at the time, kind of leading from a spiritual dimension and of course a religious dimension in order to affect well-being for Māori communities again. Then we had an interesting growth in political leadership. We had Wī Parata, Huneheke Ngāpua, James Carroll, Hori Taiaroa, and others. So we started to see Māori participating at the highest echelons in society to fight actually for Māori communities and their health. We also saw at around about the turn of the century the new leadership, and that was from Tāpirana Ngata and others, and also the emergence of leaders from a medical perspective. So that includes people like Pōmare, Te Rangi Hiroa, WhareTapa, and Allison and others who had made forays into medical institutions to become qualified and to become knowledgeable in the medical approach to health. So with all these things happening, we started to turn a corner by about 1910, we started to see our population growth increase, and our understanding of diseases and so forth happened as well. Of course, she pushed for the building of Mahinarangi at Tūranga Waiwai, next to Tūrongo. That was set up to be a hospital, actually, and it opened in 1920. And it offered a new way of thinking about health. This was very advanced thinking, really, for Māori. So what she advocated for was for Mahinarangi to be a hospital, but operating under the auspices of tikanga Māori, as well as the medical approach. So it was pretty advanced new thinking for the time. Pity that the government didn't take it up. They never funded it, so it never really took off. So that was 1918. Quarter of the world's population is thought to have died from the Spanish flu. From a personal perspective, my great-grandfather lost 8 of his siblings to the Spanish flu. This was in Eastern Bay of Plenty, where it was absolutely virulent there. So we know this because we looked at the records, and they all died towards the end of 1918. They were all adults, so they died in ages between 18 and 32. So we pretty much surmised that that was from the flu, because it had completely ravaged Eastern Bay of Plenty Māori communities. So a bit of personal perspective there, huge. So the Spanish flu decimated the adult population. So we had the most needed resource for Māori communities dying. So it became very difficult. We had young children and the elderly that survived the Spanish flu, and they had to rebuild from there. Okay, and then we had other flus as well. So 1957, we had the Asian flu, and that's where we started to really break down what they were. So we had subtypes and stuff. So we're very familiar with the H and the N figures when it comes to viruses. So we started to understand more about viruses and how they worked. And then we had COVID occurring in December 2019. And we recall, of course, that just before that we had the measles outbreak in Aotearoa, which spread to the Pacific and had, again, a huge impact on our communities. And then we saw from COVID, Māori activate their own community responses. So we had road checking sites and stuff like that. I don't call them roadblocks or anything. I think they were a good idea, and they were, certainly useful. So we've learned a lot ourselves about viruses over the years, and now that we've come to COVID, we've got a different story altogether. Okay, so what I'm going to do is move into Te Whare Tapa Wha. Now, the reason I chose Te Whare Tapa Wha was because many of the Māori service providers and others have used the Whare Tapa Wha framework to address COVID-19, and it's really useful. It's a simple tool to use. It's a simple framework, and of course, it's built from a Māori worldview perspective. And so we know that it's a useful thing to use Māori worldviews when we're talking about working in Māori communities. Overall, I think Aotearoa New Zealand, we've demonstrated good leadership from our government and from experts in public health. And from that, and from the participation of the public, we're getting extraordinary results, I think. But leading up to COVID, we saw that Māori were very much at the forefront in terms of leading Indigenous health promotion, not just here in Aotearoa, but now globally. So there's a lot of attention being given to Māori that are leading in that sphere, and we've got many here in Aotearoa. So there's kind of a lens now on Indigenous health promotion, guided by Indigenous worldviews, and Māori are leading on this. What we're seeing is that, and you'll see it in the Waioura Indigenous Peoples Statement for Planetary Health and Sustainable Development. It was the first time ever that we had an Indigenous statement of that sort at the global level, led by Māori and others, but certainly we're at the forefront of drafting that up. But it speaks in a different way about health and well-being now, and I think COVID's kind of brought this up that we need to look at the whole picture in an entirely different way. And we're seeing conversations around that already. So there are some commonalities from Indigenous peoples in terms of their the way they see the natural world. And part of that is that humans are part and parcel of the environment and they're not above it. That's a common theme throughout Indigenous thinking throughout the world. So we are part and parcel of the natural environment. We do not live above it. We do not master it, but rather we live with it. So Indigenous thinking is kind of relinking our thinking about well-being and health back to the environment. So again, we need to be concerned about environmental health, climate health, the biosphere, the ecosystem, and our relationships to those things as humans while we pursue human well-being. We could have used Te Pai Mahutonga, but I think in this case, because so many people are using Te Whare Tapa Wha, that it's useful to start from that perspective. We could have used Te Pai Mahutonga, but I think that's more of a longer-term thinking framework. We might bring that back post-COVID to see how we operationalise Te Pai Mahutonga as another really useful health promotion framework. Okay. So, but in this case, most people are using Te Whare Tapa Wha, and so what I'll do is I'll touch on those few things just over the next couple of slides. Okay, so we know the four aspects of Te Whare Tapa Wha. They're really well known now in health and other areas. And the first one we might want to look at, of course, is taha tinana, physical well-being. So some of the key messages that are being disseminated at the moment, these are the common themes. So I've had a brief scoping of what messages are being put out to the public in terms of Maori health particularly. Excuse me. So these are the messages that are coming out, and they're all very well and good and important. But COVID kind of gives us another opportunity to think, drill a little bit more deeper into these facets. So taha tinana, it's really an opportunity, I think, beyond these key messages to lift our gaze and to really emphasize our relationship to Papa Tuanuku, to the earth. And again, we're seeing Indigenous dialogue coming to the fore. So when we think about that, so we know that taha tinana is not simply about our physical health and our physical well-being, but indeed our physical connection and relationship to the environment in which we live and other people. So for instance, when we are saying our pepeha, who we are, dialogue, we do mention things that are important to us in terms of the physical environment from which we come. Hence, maunga, awa, marae, wharunui, whānau, iwi. These are all physical aspects. So the taha tinana perspective is to reassert the importance of those things, of our physical connection, our physical relationship to everything else. So the dialogue is really interesting actually when we look at it. So we've got people like Damachi Kruger from Tūhoe expressing well-being in a different way, in a different and interesting way. So I'll quote him, he says, the Tūhoe people don't own the urewera owns itself. So very much looking at Papa Tuanuku, earth, whenua, as a living, breathing entity that we have not only a spiritual connection with, but a physical one from a tinana perspective. And others from overseas, like Trevor Hancock, of course, who's intimately interested in this kaupapa. And it's about how do we reinstate a sense of reverence for the earth, for Papa Tuanuku, for nature. Because it has diminished over time, and certainly since the emergence of the industrial era, our relationship to Papa Tuanuku has changed somewhat. So it's not just about the sanctity of human life, but indeed the sanctity of all life on this planet. Okay, carry on. Taha whānau, of course. So those of us working in health and other areas will understand that The basic unit in Māori society is the whānau. We don't think in individualistic terms. So again, these are the key messages that are being disseminated. They're very broad, and they are sort of the same as the messages that are being disseminated to the general public. But again, if we're going to use Te Whare Tapa Wha, then it gives us an opportunity again to really drill down into this taha whānau and think about what that really means in light of COVID. So it allows us some time, I guess, to think about kaupapa like whakapapa, whānau history. Because even from a health promotion perspective, we know that social cohesion is a key determinant of health, and that this social cohesion aspect is of high priority for Māori communities, Māori whānau, iwi hapu whānau. So we need to think about ways how we maintain social cohesion while this is all happening. And for me, I think, in terms of taha whānau, it gives us the opportunity to re-engage with our identity and to really bring that to the fore and to celebrate it. Again, from this taha whānau perspective, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that we are approaching Multikey, because we know from Multikey that this thing around bubbles is not new. We've been doing this for centuries. Because of course, when Multikey arrives, the harvest is complete. We then had downtime. The weather was colder, the days were shorter, and the nights were longer. So it meant that we were in bubbles already, and that because of those bubbles, well, whare, we had the opportunity to share with each other, share stories in isolation. So again, drawing on traditional aspects and bringing those forward into the contemporary context, I think might be useful. So Multikey will allow us again to really think about what these bubbles mean, how we are living with each other in terms of whānau, and enhancing the whānau aspect of Whare Tapa Wha. Okay, so taha hinenaro, mental and emotional well-being. Again, these are the key messages that have been put forward. Again, valid and important, but from a Whare Tapa Wha perspective, we might again think about the breadth of what that means. So it's more than just finding things to occupy the mind, but find some deeper analysis of how we think and why we think in certain ways. So a really good time for reflection in terms of how we feel about our minds and our emotional well-being. So from this perspective, I think it'd be good to re-engage with this idea of storytelling. We're a storytelling culture, basically, and we relay very important messages through our storytelling. So the stories that our ancestors have left for us, and that's the Maori stories and so forth. They were more than just neat stories. They actually had deeper meanings to them. Covid-19, I think, provides an opportunity for us to re-look at those stories and to draw on the wisdom that was handed down to us from our ancestors. The other thing with storytelling is that we know it's both uplifting and it's protective in terms of mental well-being. And it also kind of gives us a sense of efficacy. And we've seen it occurring particularly in social media. So we've seen Māori engaged in performance, songwriting, kōrero, and a whole lot of other things. So engaging that way and maintaining connections to others through media, I think, has been a success story in all of this. Okay. And finally, but probably most importantly, taha wairua, spirituality and sense of self. Again, key messages here. You know, tikanga practices have been adapted but not forsaken. And this has occurred, we know, a number of times in history. So although our gatherings are restricted, particularly tangihana, which has an acute impact on Māori whānau. Hongi and hariru, not so much. But what we know, at least historically, is that we didn't need a tūpāpaku to have a tangihana. It's nice to be there, but it's not imperative. It's a strong obligation, but it's not an imperative. And we can relate that to historical stories like, for instance, the 28th Māori Battalion. When our sons were dying overseas, we couldn't bring their tūpāpaku home. They were buried overseas. Nevertheless, we held tangihana here in Aotearoa. And they were basically, once whānau received notification, they gathered together at the marae with photos and so forth, and for all intents and purposes held a tangihana. So the releasing of the wairua of our sons that were dying overseas was still able to be carried out in a kind of a functional, processed way. So even though we're in COVID, our adaptability comes to the fore. So we understand what's occurring. We have in place mechanisms that can help us deal with it together. We've also seen the kind of emergence of live streaming tangi and things like that. So the technology is available for us to participate, just not in the same physical way. And I think that's worth bearing in mind. And we are spiritual well-beings. And of course, all of the aspects of Whare Tapa Wha are all connected together. So we shouldn't really think in terms of dividing them into those aspects, but rather finding how they all connect to each other. So there's a saying, a whakatauki, that goes, ko te hinanaro te ara ki te wairua. So our minds are the pathway to our spiritual beings, to our spirituality. And I think that's useful to think about given COVID today and Whare Tapa Wha being used as a framework. Okay. So I thought I'd end here. So short and sweet, I think. But I'll end on this whakatauki here. So it's mate atu he te kura, haramaira no he te kura. So loosely translated, it's as we lose a chief or chieftain or leader or warrior or something vital and important to us, so emerges someone else. But in this case, I'm thinking that COVID's kind of changing other things. I think we're seeing the end of a particular regime, and we're moving towards something different. And I think this whakatauki depicts for me is that we're leaving behind something that was nice and appropriate for the time, but we now need to move into something else that's appropriate for a new way of living in the world. Okay, kia ora. Thank you very much, everyone. I think I'm handing it to Sione.
Sione, thank you.
Kia ora, Trevor, and thank you for that presentation and the significance of whānau and its centrality in this framework that Samuel Zanduri and others have put together for us, building on our indigenous knowledge, principles, and wisdom. And I got carried away by your presentation. I forgot to check whether there are questions coming through, but in fact, there aren't any questions at this
great.
point.
Okay.
Well,
I'm happy to take a discussion if someone wants to add to it. I mean, that's a really brief skim across the surface.
Yeah, Christelle has written that, not a question to you, but could you highlight the whakatauki around allow our minds to help our wairua? The whakatauki that, if you go back to your last slide that you put on, I think that's what Christelle is referring to.
Right.
Allow our minds to help our wairua.
Oh, yes.
You can elaborate on that. As you know, with the indigenous statements that you refer to, spiritual dimension is prominent in
Yes.
that statement. But over to you, Trevor.
So it wasn't really a question. Was it? I just wanted some more discussion on that. That's the whakatauki, the first one. I heard that mentioned in a whai kōrero at a marae once, where a korowa was talking on the paipai, and he elaborated a little bit more than I have. The debate was over how do we engage in this spirituality aspect. Where do we start? And he thought we should start with our minds, because we've got to turn our minds on to think about wairuatanga and so forth, in order for us to engage in the wairua realm. So, from a Whare Tapa Wha perspective, we know that the hinenaro and the wairua realm are in constant dialogue, and hence the need for us to at all times be prepared to engage in karakia. So the karakia is part and parcel of the dialogue that we need in order to engage with the wairua realm, in order for it to affect our health and well-being. So I always remember that sort of conversation that we were having around that. So I thought I'd bring it into this discussion, if not just as an anecdote.
No, thank you, Trevor. I hope that will satisfy to some degree that the what Christelle asked for. From the Starship community, it's not a question, but I'd like to say to you, Gamihi, and it's a wonderful presentation. Miraka Norgate, Miraka has got Miraka has got a request asking if you can send your PowerPoint after this presentation. I assume it's a yes. That's wonderful. So there you are, Miraka. You will have a copy, and I think that goes for everyone who has registered with Emma.
We'll
Roy
put it on
Mata,
the website.
Yeah, Roy Mata mentioned that you spoke about reconnecting with Papa Tuanuku. Perhaps, Trevor, you can reiterate on that one again while I read on the few emails that are, the few chats that are coming through. There might be a few more questions there.
Sure. I think at a deep level, it's about understanding that Papa Tuanuku is a living, breathing entity, that she is alive. We've known that, but I think it's about reasserting that a little bit more, particularly in the current global environment, actually, where we've got some societies that are completely disengaged with that discourse. For me, it's about going back and re-engage with that discussion. That kind of, we are Papa Tuanuku, and Papa Tuanuku is us. Same as, we are the awa, and the awa is us.
So we are one with our environment.
That's right.
And the environment is us. Here's a question from IUHPE, Mahuika. She writes, Kia ora, I am wondering if you have had some specific examples from this COVID-19 response of the kaupapa that you have discussed today, being the leading kaupapa in their response. Any particular, any non-Maori organizations or responses?
Oh, yeah. So there's some on the Mental Health Foundation. They're more or less a mainstream organisation, so they've got some stuff up there. Small NGOs have utilised Whare Tapa Wha. The beauty of it is it's simple. It doesn't have many facets. So when I spoke about Te Pai Mahutanga, maybe not at this point being appropriate, but I think it sure is. Whare Tapa Wha allows you to, in fairly simple terms, group the most important things. As Mason kind of pointed out when he developed it.
Well, the next question is from Fran David. And Fran is asking whether, well, firstly, a wonderful presentation. And the question is whether you had a discussion prior with Sir Mason about this presentation or his view. And if we are to move into the new, should we be looking at Matariki, the Matariki framework? What are your thoughts on that, Trevor?
I haven't engaged with Mason for a little while, for about a year, I think now. But no, not before this presentation. It's just I'm just sharing his framework and adding to it my own personal perspective, I guess. But yes, the Matariki framework is really interesting, and again, multifaceted. And it's not a new thing, but it's kind of new in terms of our approach to it from a health perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So more work to be done there, I think. So certainly I'd just encourage people to take the framework, take it apart a little bit and see, glean out all the main fields within Matariki. So Mason did present on it at the World Conference last year. I don't know how much further it's gone since then. Hence my reasoning for utilising Te Whare Tapa Wha. But yes, I do think Matariki is a great framework. Always
that
was.
Might be your next webinar, Trevor.
Yeah, it could
I
be.
think what underpins that comment is that perhaps your next webinar to bring Matariki, as you said, Sir Mason did an excellent presentation and overlaying Matariki on Te Pai Mahatonga at the World Conference on Health Promotion. And for the information of our participants, if you go to our website of the Health Promotion Forum, a PDF of the PowerPoint by Sir Mason is on our website. You can get some more details on the framework of Matariki that Sir Mason presented.
Yep. Well, so they're individual frameworks, but I think another way to look at it is they're kind of layered, like whakapapa.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one to come out was Te Whare Tapa Wha in the 80s, and then in the late 90s we had Te Pai Mahutonga, and now we have the Matariki frameworks, and they all kind of what's the word? They're all kind of developed on top of each other. Okay. So we've got some significant foundational stuff there, but we're now thinking in broader terms. Yes, they're interconnected.
They are interconnected. Deanne King is asking, perhaps in the future, some discussions on how to operationalize the Pai Mahutonga after COVID-19. Here's a question from Kerry. Firstly, Trevor, wonderful presentation. The concern is that lowering to level, from level 3, we have already seen the rubbish increasing near the walkways, the increase in domestic violence during this time, police having to break up parties, abusing the guidelines. How can we reconnect with Papatuanuku and and ensure that we don't keep on repeating the mistakes of the past?
I think what I was trying to describe, I guess, is that the opportunities there. What it's going to require are the people in this call, actually. All of us are leading from the front and being vociferous about the need to protect and nurture nature. And so start with the individual, although there's an opportunity here, of course, to start with the whānau. But yeah, it is disappointing to see some of those things. I think by continuing with our messaging, with our practices, with our own behaviours, that over time we can change things. We need a critical mass of people that all think the same way as our questioner, in terms of being individual but working collectively.
Last two messages from Jill. Jill Berge, thanking you for the presentation, and also from the team at PHC, finally IUHPE, to you, Trevor, thanks for the presentation. And they remind us of the whakatauki that we all know. Whānui, the whānui awa, ko ko te awa ko au.
Ai.
Ko te awa ko au.
Yep.
So good reminder of our connection in the connectedness to Papatuanuku. Back to you, Trevor. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. For the first time, great. And I'm sure the technical hiccups will not visit us same time. But may I give my thanks and gratitude to all the 80 participants who managed to migrate to this last minute to the new link that we sent you. Again, on behalf of the team, wonderful presentation, Trevor, and we appreciate your participation from all the friends of the Health Promotion Forum and participants around the country. Back to you, Trevor.
Kia ora. Nō reira e te iwi, kua tae wawe mai tātou ki te whakakapina o tātou wānanga mō tēnei rā. Nari, ko taku tūmanako ka tuku atu kia koutou aku mihi. Anō, e ai ki ngā tikana ka whakakapi wa tātou hui ai runa ake nei te karakia. Nō reira tōhuna māhuna. Titiro iho maira e te atua kia mātou au ponunga. E whakamoimuti atu nei kia koe i tēnei rā. Whakamautia ki roto ki tēnā ki tēnō mātou. Nā ko rero nā whakaaro hoki. Hei awhi, hei tiaki i a mātou i roto o mātou mahi. Manaaki tia mai rātau e pāngi ana i te mate. Te mā wiwi hoki kia tau atu anō rātau ki te taumata o te oranga. Kuhi kraiti hoki tō mātou ariki. Āmene. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Trevor. And that ends our meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Trevor. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. That was really nice.
You're welcome.
Kia ora, Trevor from Miraka.
Miraka, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Yes, people can chat with Trevor now.
Okay, te pai o hau. Koe anō. Hai ki te kiti ia koe.
Online and chat with Trevor.
Ka hia koe noho ana.
I roto whakatū, te wai paunama o te tau ihu o te waka.
Ka vai. Hari koa te wakarono ki a koe.
Koe anō, kia ora mo tō mahi pai.
Kua pai.